Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 1, Unattended Active Directory Installation of benandbrady.com. In this video, we are going to use our first server, namely DC1, which is simply configured as a default server and make it a domain controller by installing Active Directory. I'm sure you've installed Active Directory before. In this video, you will learn how to install Active Directory in an unattended manner. So in this video, you will learn how to create an answer file. You will learn how to create the configure the parameters of the answer file so that you can pre-answer the questions that the Active Directory installation wizard asks us, and then we'll go ahead and perform the unattended installation of Active Directory. So you've installed Active Directory before. Let me show you as an advanced feature how the Active Directory can be installed completely unattended. To begin with, a little introduction of Active Directory. Active Directory is a central security database that lets users access resources anywhere on the network. Just like a telephone book that holds names and information about friends and family, such as names and addresses and telephone numbers, the Active Directory holds information about network resources such as users, groups, and computers. It also holds the security settings for these users so that a user can log in from anywhere on their network and then access the same resources and have the same permissions applied to each user no matter which computer they log in from. So when you first install server, it is simply a standalone or a workgroup server. It does not have the central feature known as the Active Directory. So what we need to do is make our computer a domain controller. The act of making a server a domain controller is known as the installation of the Active Directory. Now there are various ways of installing Active Directory, and I'm sure you've done this one way or another before. The first and the most common method is what you do is you go to start run and type the command DC promo that starts what is known as the Active Directory installation wizard. This wizard will basically ask you questions such as whether you want to create a new domain, or are you installing an additional domain controller in the existing domain, and so forth. You answer the questions, and then the server will start creating the Active Directory, make sure it copies the required installation files, and then restart the server, and then the Active Directory is installed. So this is the most common way of installing Active Directory, and I'm sure you've seen this method in many of our previous videos. The method that we're going to discuss in this particular video would be by creating an answer file. What we're going to do is the following. We will install Active Directory in an unattended manner. In other words, we already know what questions the Active Directory asks us. What we will do is we'll prepare an answer file and pre-answer those questions that the Active Directory installation wizard asks. So we know what questions it asks, we know the answer to those questions, we pre-write those answers into an answer file and save it, and this time when we run DC promo, we actually run DC promo with the switch, informing DC promo that please do not ask me the question, look up the answers to those questions in the answer file that we will specify. So the answer file is nothing but a special format of DC promo informing the command DC promo to actually look up the answers in a text file that we've created in advance. So this is the second method, and we're going to use this method in this particular video. The backup and restore method I've shown you before. This is if in case you want to create an additional domain controller, what you can do is perform a backup of the first domain controller, restore it on the newer computer on which you're going to install, make the additional domain controller, and then run the restore from there. So this is a method that I've shown you in labs 14 and 15. And last but not the least is the configure your server. This is a central wizard that lets you configure and install many components of Server 2003, including Active Directory. So let us use method number 2, creating the answer file, and then then install Active Directory in the unattended manner. So I'm going to minimize the screen. Now again, just to give you a brief introduction, this is my recording screen where you see the Train Signal logo. What we need to do is go to DC1, which is domain controller 1, and if you recall, I already have a shortcut, or a remote desktop connection made out for it. So here I am on DC1. I'm going to log in. Okay, I'm in DC1, and we're going to run the DC promo process over here. But before we run this process, let's first learn a little bit more about this file known as the answer file. So I'm going to take you to the next screen over here. The answer file takes a lot of parameters. It's simply a text file, which I'm going to show you in a moment. But before we do that, let's look at what some of the parameters are of this answer file. So I'm going to create a notepad file with the following parameters. There are several parameters. If you want to go through all of them, then what you can do is in the server 2003 CD, make sure you go to the support folder, and in there are two files, deploy.chm and ref or ref.chm, and these files gives you complete list of parameters that can be configured, some mandatory, others optional, in this answer file. What I've done is the following. I've gone through all the parameters and picked up only the ones that are essential for our task. So here is the list of parameters, and this is where these parameters apply. The first parameter that we can talk about is called reboot on success. So basically what we'll be doing is configuring this, and this what this parameter does is asks us whether after the successful installation of Active Directory, would you like to automatically restart the server, yes or no. So depending on how you answer the question, it will either restart it automatically or it will wait for you to click on the restart button. So that's the first parameter. The second parameter, and this is required for all installations. Now let me explain to you what I mean by all installations. When you run the DC promo process, you could be doing any of the following. You could be creating a new domain in a new forest. All right. In other words, you're setting up a new structure for a company. What we're doing is we're setting up the Active Directory for a fictitious company known as Ben and Brady Ice Cream Corporation, and a domain will be called benandbrady.com. So we are actually setting up a brand new domain and a brand new forest. So that's one type of Active Directory installation. What you could also do is set up additional domain controllers in an existing domain in an existing forest. So for example, when we actually set up Active Directory on DC2, we would have already created the domain Ben and Brady, so that would be the additional domain controller. Or you could create a new child tree, or I'm sorry, you could create a new child domain, or a brand new tree, or a brand new forest. So all these are different types of installations. The following apply to all types of installations. In other words, no matter how you plan to install the Active Directory, you must configure the following. The first of these parameters is database path. This is giving us a file path, or the location on the hard disk where the Active Directory database will be installed, the log path where the log files will be installed. When you install Active Directory, it creates a folder in which all the policies are stored, known as a sysvol folder. This must be on NTFS5 partition, and this is the path or the location where the system volume will be installed. Okay, then you also need to know the name of the username and the password of the user. This is the person who has the credentials and the permissions to actually install Active Directory on that computer. Typically, this person is the administrator of that computer. And the user domain. If this is if you're joining an additional domain controller, you would write the name of the domain. But if you're doing it for the very first time, your user domain is nothing but the work group that you've set up. Okay, so these are the different parameters. Now let me just, so that we don't do this in abstract, let me just take you to a file that I've pre-created so we can tally the two together. So what I'm doing now is taking you to DC1, and on DC1 I have already created a file, and I've saved the file on the root of the C drive. I've called this file dcinfo.txt. This will be our answer file. So once again, our answer file is called dcinfo.txt. I'm going to double click on it so that we can relate the two together. And here's how you create the answer file. This answer file, by the way, is also typed up in the lab. In other words, you have a PDF file on the CD-ROM. You could always copy and paste it from there or recreate it the way I've set up over here. So the first line will be called DC install. You have to put that in square brackets, all right? And the first parameter that we've set up is reboot on success. No. In other words, what I'm saying is that after you've successfully installed Active Directory, do not reboot. Let me click on the restart button. In actuality, you may want to set this to yes. The reason I've set this to no is so that after it is successfully installed, it may not go or fly by us very quickly. I can show you that the Active Directory is actually finished installing and then click on the button myself. This is just so that when I'm doing the video, I can pause at the right time or make a point before the server restarts. So I've said no over here. You can might as well set this to yes. Database path is where the Active Directory will be installed. Now here's how to set up this parameter. You should always put an equal to sign. By the way, all these parameters should start with the parameter name, equal to, and then the answer to that parameter or the value of that parameter. So once again, you start with a square bracket and the word DC install. This is the section of the answer file that relates to the Active Directory installation. You put in the parameter, equal to, and then the value of the parameter. And there is a space between reboot on success and equal to, and there is a space between equal to and the answer, which is no in this case. So for database path, the answer is percentage system root percentage slash ntds. This variable percentage system root percentage basically means wherever or whichever drive the Active Directory is installed, go to that folder, and in that folder make a subfolder called ntds. What this means is the following. In our case, I have installed server on DC1 on the C drive, and in there is a folder called Windows. So what will happen is the following. In this Windows folder, it will make a subfolder known as ntds and then install the Active Directory over there. So let me take you back to this file. So that's what this means. A database path equal to system root wherever Windows is installed. In our case, we're going to substitute this with c:/Windows, and then it will make a subfolder called ntds. In this manner, the same thing over here. The log path will be under the same location in the folder called ntds, and the sys volume will be under the sys volume path. The username who is authorized to actually install Active Directory is administrator. The password is password. So these are the parameters that we had covered so far. I just wanted to take you back to the answer file so that you can put in some values and understand exactly what we are configuring. Going on to the other set of parameters, these parameters you need to use if you're installing Active Directory in a new tree, in a new forest. In other words, the very first domain controllers requires this parameter. The first parameter is replica or new domain. Replica basically means this will be an additional domain controller, so this will be a new domain. So hence you need to type in the value of domain. Tree or child, well, you're going to create a new tree, so the value over here will be tree. Create or join will actually be creating a new tree, not joining an existing tree, so it will be create. New domain DNS name, this is where you will type the name of your domain. In our case, it will be the domain for Ben and Brady Ice Cream Corporation, which is benandbrady.com. DNS on network, over here you simply have to answer as yes or no. If you say no over here, it's going to force it to actually look for DNS and then actually install the DNS. Here's the parameter. I'm going to jump to one parameter over here. Auto install and configure DNS. If you answer yes over here, these two work together. If you say DNS on network, it will say, well, look for a DNS on network, and over here if it doesn't find it, it will actually auto install the DNS for us. I have not installed the DNS server, so I'm going to do it in this manner. Over here, let's make a point about DNS. DNS is absolutely needed in order for Active Directory to work. Active Directory works with DNS. DNS, the domain naming service, is also a service locator service. This is a service that informs clients and other domain controllers as to who the domain controllers are. Then the domain NetBIOS name. This is a name for backward compatibility for Windows NT domains. In our case, it will simply be Ben and Brady. And then the site name. The default site name is default first site, and we're going to leave it as that. So we need to answer these parameters, and I've done so already. Let me minimize this screen and take you back to DC1. So here we are on DC1, and let's look at how I've answered these questions. Here we go. This is the set that we need to look at this point. Replica or domain, new domain. Tree or child tree, create or join, we're going to create a new one. Our domain DNS name will be benandbrady.com. DNS on network, I'm saying no, there is no DNS on network, so basically force it to look for it and then install. Domain NetBIOS name, Ben and Brady. Allow anonymous access, no. In other words, this is for backward compatibility. It is not mandatory. I put it over here. This, if you've installed Active Directory using DC Promo, you must have seen one of the options over there is compatibility with Windows NT and so forth. I've said don't worry about it, since we don't have NT servers in our network. No is okay over here. Auto config DNS, yes. Site name, I've named it as default -first -site. Okay, you can put any other site name over here. This one is also optional, but I highly recommend you set it up. Safe mode admin password. This is the password for Active Directory services restore mode. In other words, if you ever have to restore your Active Directory from backup, and you will see a lab on this in lab 15 in the Advanced Active Directory series, I've shown you how to do that. The password for that should never be password. In fact, it will not accept it. So just to pick up a different password, I use the word rainbow. So here we go. Here's our answer file. It is ready, and it is sitting on the C drive, or the root of the C drive. So I'm going to close this file now, and then let's go ahead and install Active Directory. But before we do that, let's summarize. Going back to the screen so that we know exactly what we're doing. There are different methods of installing Active Directory. We are using the answer file method. What we have done is pre-created the file called the file dcinfo.txt and stored it on the C drive, on the root of the C drive of DC1. Now, when I'm going to run DC promo, usually when you type DC promo in the run button, it's going to ask you the question. So you have to run DC promo with a switch. And let me show you what the switch is. So here we go. What you're going to do is type DC promo. And again, if you stop over here, it's going to ask you for the questions. So what you do is you provide the switch. The switch is /answer : this is the keyword. And then over here, where it says answer file, you provide the location of and the name of the answer file. So basically over here we'll type DC promo /answer : and then we will give it the location and the name of the answer file, which is c:/dcinfo.txt. So let's do that. So here we are, I'm on DC1, as you can see over here, and let's right click on DC1 properties, go to the computer name, and here we go. DC1 is still a work group. Let's install the first domain controller in Ben and we are going to call our domain benandbrady.com. What I've also done is inserted the CD-ROM so that in case it needs some additional files, which it will, to install the DNS, the CD is already available. So that it does not interrupt us at all. So I'm going to click on start and then go to run over here. Then over here I'm going to type DC promo, and then we will use a switch and then type the word answer with a colon, and then over here we will give it the location and the name of the answer file. The answer file is in a C drive, and the name of the answer file is .txt. Okay, and now I'm going to click on the OK button. Let's hit the OK button now and see what happens. So let's click on OK over here. Here we go. The installation of Active Directory is started. It should be completely unattended. It should not prompt us for most of the stuff that it needs. It should be able to find all the answers it needs in the C drive in the dcinfo.txt files. So let's hope that's true. In fact, it found the answers, and so far it likes it. As you can see, it has actually started writing the Active Directory, and this process can take a few minutes. So I'll let this process run on the screen, and then while this is running, let's talk about other features and talk about what we're going to do next. So at this point, what we are doing is installing Active Directory for a fictitious company known as benandbrady.com. What I'm doing is I'm installing Active Directory on the computer known as DC1. So DC1 will become the first domain controller of the domain benandbrady.com. The NetBIOS name of that domain is benandbrady. Once this finishes, I'll have my first domain controller in that domain. This domain controller's IP address was 200.200.200.1. It belongs to the first network that we're going to set up, namely the 201.0 network. I have a second domain controller, I have a second server which is not yet a domain controller. The name of that server is DC2, and guess what? We will set up that as an additional domain controller for this domain. In this video, we will be setting up just one domain, benandbrady.com. The idea is not to show you multiple domains, but to show you multiple sites within the same domain. So there'll be one domain, and there will be two domain controllers in the first subnet, DC1 and DC2. So DC2 will be an additional domain controller in the benandbrady.com domain. And then we will set up DC3 as an additional domain controller. The major difference between DC2 and DC3 will be they'll both be domain controllers. However, DC3 is on a second subnet. So DC3's IP address is going to be 200.200.202.1. All right, and then it will be an additional domain controller in the second subnet. Having done that, we will be setting up our router. Our router is simply a server that has two homes. It has home on switch 1 or network 1, as well as on switch 2 or network 2, and then it will route the traffic between DC1, DC2, and between DC3. So we're going to set up our router as we're going to set up the server as a router and configure routing and remote access so that we can route packets between the two networks. So in this manner, we're going to proceed ahead. As you can see, the Active Directory is still continuing to write. What I'm going to do is take a little pause in the video over here. As soon as it finishes and gives me that screen to restart, remember we said reboot on success, we said no to that, so that I can actually show you that the Active Directory installation took place as expected without any hassles. Actually, at this point, you're looking at the copying, the file copying process. This is where it's installing the DNS. And because DNS is not installed when we installed the default server, it's actually copying those required files. my CD-ROM is inserted. Now if you do not have the CD-ROM over there, here we go, waiting for the DNS service to start. It's going to start the service now. If you did not have the CD installed, don't worry about it. It will actually prompt you that please insert the CD-ROM, and then you click on the OK button and then go. But if you've actually inserted the CD-ROM in advance, it is really unattended. It won't prompt you for any other answer or any other question. So I'm going to pause the video over here a little bit and then join you as soon as I see on my screen the restart button. Actually, as soon as I said I'm going to pause the video, and when I did, the restart button showed up. So here we go. Okay, so Active Directory has been successfully installed. I'm going to click on restart now. This will actually restart DC1. So we're going to lose our remote desktop connection. There we go, we just lost it. And then the server is going to restart. Once the server restarts, I'm going to go through the basics of Active Directory so that we know what the different objects are, and to verify that the Active Directory has been successfully installed. So I'm going to pause the video one more time and join you back once again after DC1 has restarted. Welcome back. The server DC1 just restarted. In fact, now it is a domain controller. So what I'm going to do is give you a little tour of the Active Directory, and this is what you must also do every time you install a domain controller, just to make sure that Active Directory got installed properly and everything else is exactly where you expect it to be. So to begin with, let's first right click on the object DC1. So what I did was reestablish my connection to DC1. So here I am. I'm actually now right clicking on the computer object for DC1. So I'm going to right click on this, click on properties, and then go to the computer name tab over here. Here we go. Remember, it used to be workgroup over here. Now our domain is called benandbrady.com, and here's the full, or the FQDN for this computer, fully qualified domain name, dc1.benandbrady.com. So I'm going to close this box. So that's good news. Active Directory has been installed, and we are finding the information as expected. So the next thing we're going to do is look for our admin tools. So I'm going to go to Start, click on the Administrator Tools link over here, and then expect to find the tool called Active Directory Users and Computers. So let's do that. And this would also give me an opportunity to give you a little tour of the Active Directory. What you're looking at is our domain database known as benandbrady.com. We are actually looking at the Active Directory. What I highly recommend is that the first time you visit there, click on the view and then select the advanced features option so that you can see everything there is to see. Otherwise, some of the containers and some of the tabs are hidden. So here we go. We are looking at the Active Directory. Let's go through some of the important containers out here. The first container is what is known as a users container. By default, all the users and groups are created over here. So the only user account that exists at this point that we are using actually is the administrator's account, and that is under the users container. You can of course create your own OUs and then create users in those OUs. Then the next container that I'm interested in is called the domain controllers container, which is right over here. This was created by the system. All the domain controllers of the benandbrady.com will have a computer account in this particular container. So at this point, I have just one domain controller, DC1, and this computer account was created for me when I installed Active Directory. Then the computers container over here shows the clients for our network. We obviously have not installed any clients, so this one is empty. So once again, one domain controller, it is listed out here, and I can see my domain benandbrady.com created. So far so good. Everything is going as expected. So first you check over here under my computer, then you go to Active Directory Users and Computers and check whether the domain appears as it's supposed to. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the DNS link. So admin tools and then DNS, just to make sure that the DNS got installed properly and it is working. In DNS, we should expect to find our first forward lookup zone, and our zone should be called benandbrady.com. So here we go. Congratulations. Once again, it has made it. And in there is just one computer, and it should be registered at this point. So let's check it out. Here's the computer. It is registered as DC1, and then the IP address is 200.200.201.1. Now you may be wondering, why am I seeing a second host A with 169, 254, 199, 141? Well, there is a good reason for this. If you recall, I'm going to minimize this so that you understand exactly what's going on. Oops, minimize too much. Here we go. I just want to minimize the screen and still say on DC1. Remember, there are two NIC cards on DC1. Here's the first NIC card which we are using, and here's the second NIC card which is enabled but actually not connected. So those of you who are familiar with the process of DHCP and the client trying to obtain an IP address, because it is configured for automatic configuration, right here, it's configured for automatic configuration and was unable to find a DHCP server because I don't have one on my network, it automatically obtained an API-IPA address of 169.254 in number and in number. Okay, so what you're going to do is disable this so that it does not try to obtain an IP address. This is just to help matters a little bit. And again, this may not be the case in your computers because you may not have a second NIC card. But I just wanted you to know, because this item showed up over here, and why it is registering a number as an IP address for host A, also known as DC1. But here's the number that we're interested in. Eventually what should happen is each of our computers, which will use this as the DNS server, should register themselves one by one. So eventually I expect to find DC2 over here with the IP address of 200, 200, 202.1 and so forth. Okay, and we'll check that every time we create a new domain controller in our domain. So everything is working as expected, and when you perform this this lab, the only thing that I highly recommend that you keep in mind is, and here are some of the mistakes that people make. The first one is they forget to set up a static IP address before they do the DC promo process. It will not work. If you're doing this, let's say while commuting, you're in a train and you're trying to run these labs on a laptop that you've set up as a server, when you run DC promo process, it may give you some error messages simply because the network cable is not connected. If your NIC card is not connected in the back of the computer, you will see a little cross over here, and the DC promo process does not go through simply because it has to check for DNS on the network. It has to verify the uniqueness of your domain name. If you already are using the domain name benandbrady.com, it will not allow you to set it up. All right, so the NIC card has to be functioning, up and working. Otherwise, you'll see problems with this setup. And last but not the least, be very careful to the configuration settings, the parameter values for the dcinfo.txt files. Here's a file that I've created. Make sure you put the first word DC install in square brackets. These words for the letters for the parameters may or may not be case sensitive. I highly recommend you use exactly the case the way it is over here. I've run this process both ways, with case sensitivity and without, and I have not seen any issues. But I would, setting up a system file like this, I would rather that you follow the convention, and it's easier to read in any case. So once again, case sensitivity, not important, but I would follow the case if I were you, so that you have no issues when you're running this installation unattended. I'm going to close this file. So DC1 looks good, all right? And we have successfully installed domain controller using the unattended method. And we have successfully created our first domain controller, DC1, for the domain benandbrady.com. This also concludes our first video for Lab 1, which is the unattended Active Directory installation of benandbrady.com domain. I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you very soon in a different video in Active Directory.